Committee on Industry, Science, and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of January 25th, 2021. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. The first hour will be spent on clause by clause of C253, and then we will move in camera for the second hour to review a report. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name, and when you're not speaking, your microphone should be on mute. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, May 12th, 2021, the committee is meeting to begin clause by clause of Bill C-253, an act to amend the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act and the Company's Creditors Arrangement Act. I'd like to now welcome our witnesses. Here to assist us today from the Department of Industry, we have Mr. Mark Sean, Associate Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategy and Innovation Policy Sector, and Mr. Paul Morrison, Manager, Corporate Insolvency and Competition Directorate. As this is the first time that INDU is doing clause by clause of a bill, I'd like to explain how today will go. I will introduce each clause and ask if any members have any questions or comments. If you do, please raise your hand and we will keep track of the speaking order. I know that the Député Lemire is in the room, so we'll try to see if we can make sure we can see him when he's got his hand up. Si jamais, Député Lemire, je vous vois pas, s'il vous plaît, juste indiquer, m'envoyer un petit message.
If I don't see you, then the MP Lemire, just send me a little message.
Order, and once we've finished any debate on a specific clause, I'll then turn it over to the clerk for the vote. Okay, so with that, I wanted to also introduce, I know we have a legislative clerk with us today, and I'm looking in the room, there he is. Monsieur Jacques, I don't want to mask your last name, Maziad?
Maziad, yeah, that's it, Jacques Maziad. Nice
Perfect.
To be here.
Welcome to INDU.
Thank you.
So with that, we're going to start. Let me just, one moment, let me get my papers out. So you'll have in front of you your bill, and we will start with clause 1. Does anyone have any questions or comments with respect to clause 1? Oh, MP.
Point of order, Madam Chair, when you have a moment.
Okay, we have a point of order on the floor. Mr. Polyev?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that you got my amendment that I submitted. We submitted it about an hour ago, I think, but some of the other members didn't get it circulated to them, which might be a function of the lateness with which I sent it, but I just want to make sure it's there and you have it so that when the appropriate clause arises, it can be discussed.
Okay, I have not received it, but the clerk has, and it will be distributed shortly. It's on its way. So I'll give you a confirmation when we get it, just so you know that it's been received, okay?
Excellent, thanks so much.
Thanks so much. And with that, we'll go to MP Johari. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses, although I was hoping to hear a testimony from them or an intervention from them, getting a sense of in their opinion, how big the issue is, or whether they have any concern. So let me actually start by asking some question, at least for me and for those who may have been joining us the very first time in our committee, and for those who are actually monitoring the committee. To either of our two witnesses, my understanding is based on the December 2019, we have about 1.23 million corporations in Canada. Off of those, about 1.2 million are small businesses, which is about 97.9%. Another 1.9%, or 22,905 of them, are medium-sized businesses. Only about 2,978, which is 0.02%, are large businesses. The issue that we are dealing with is, as it relates to the unfunded pension, how large is it? What are the key stakeholder, and what is the amount, and how many people does it impact? Either of you, probably Mr. Sean or Mr. Morrison, can you comment on that first before I get to questions that I have regarding the pension liability?
You bet. So I'm happy to start, and then I may have some supplemental information from my colleague, Mr. Morrison. But essentially, the issue that we're talking about with respect to unfunded pension liabilities relates to corporations that have defined benefit pension plans. And so just by way of quick reference, there are a number of ways in which companies provide additional retirement benefits to their employees or future promises of income in retirement. Sometimes as simple as supporting individual employees and making their own contributions through things like RRSPs or other savings plans. A defined contribution mechanism. And what a defined contribution mechanism is in a pension plan, which essentially says the employee perhaps, but often the employer will make a contribution into a pension plan, and the contribution is what is defined. That is, the employer will make a set contribution on every pay that will then go into a fund, and that fund will be invested with some sort of investment scheme. And whatever that investment scheme is able to ultimately provide is what will be made available to the individual at the time of their retirement. A defined benefit pension plan, however, is one where the benefit is that which is defined, which is to say that a promise is made that upon retirement, an employee will receive a percentage, usually, of their pre-retirement income, often with some sort of formula based on best years, that indicates that will be paid in perpetuity until such time as their death. And so what we're talking about is companies that offer this type of pension plan. That number has largely been going down. I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but I'll see if Minister Morrison has information when I'm done kind of explaining. But essentially, that number is relatively small because it is a higher risk mechanism of providing retirement income, because ultimately the employer is hoping that investment returns will allow them to be able to continue to offer that benefit based on the full lifespan of their employee base. And where we have an unfunded pension liability is essentially the differential between that which was promised and that which is required, essentially. And that we calculate in two ways. So one is on a going concern basis. In a defined benefit, that means, are you actually earning enough from your investment returns and your ongoing cash requirements to be able to provide for the requirements of your pensioners at the time of their requirement? So right now, if I have 10 employees, and I've got 5 retirees, am I actually earning enough on the basis of what I have in my pension fund to be able to provide that? But then there's also a wind-up basis. Essentially, is there enough, should the company actually go insolvent, to be able to meet the promises that they made to all of their employees? And that wind-up basis is essentially a much bigger number, obviously, because you need to have had enough in your account that if you were to go insolvent, that you'd be able to pay out those promises. And the vast majority of defined benefit pension plans that are currently available in Canada are actually provincially regulated because they're in provincially regulated industries. And the requirements for plan sponsors as to the amount that they actually need to have in place varies enormously. Everything from the Quebec government, which actually does not require a solvency basis accounting, so that they do not require pension plans to account for what they would be required if they went to insolvency, all the way through to the federal government, where we actually require plans to be 100% funded on a wind-up basis or on a solvency basis.
So thank you, Mr. Sean. But can you give me an understanding of how much this package is, and how much of it is unfunded, and how much is it at risk? Are we in a position to be able to get a sense of that?
So my information that as of 2019, there were 4.3 million workers in total that were members of defined benefit pension plans. For federally regulated plans, those are, as I said, held at 100% solvency requirements, and then have to make up the difference between that which they have and that which they would be required on a solvency or wind-up basis over 5 years.
So we got the 4.2. I apologize for interrupting, and I'm hoping that the translators won't also mind. But okay, so now we know from a number point of view, 4.3 million people,
of which 1.2 million of those, Mr. Johari, are in the private sector. So the vast majority of those are actually in the public sector. So 1.2 million in the private sector who have access to a defined benefit pension plan.
Great. So 1.2 million in the private sector, which is, I assume, is part of that 2,978 roughly, which is 0.2%. Now, off of that 1.2 million individual in Canadian who are impacted, how big is this from a dollar point of view?
That I would not have at the ready, because obviously those plans vary enormously in size. But to your earlier point, it's largely larger employees that have defined benefit pension plans, although there are some organizations that only offer defined benefit pension plans, for instance, for their senior executives. And yeah.
With all the senior executives always have a bonus package that kind of, so I'm trying to figure out, the average Canadian who work for these large corporation, and off of that 1.2 million, probably, I don't know, let's say 1 million of them are not executive and they don't have bonus packages in the same. So that 1 million, we don't have any idea of how big this basket is. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get an understanding of what is the impact of really, now I want to get into the clause. What's the impact as it relates to clause 1? What does insolvency proceeding does this clause specifically affect?
Yeah, so this would provide a super priority for the unfunded pension liability, and essentially that unfunded pension liability varies enormously depending on the plan and depending on the company, and depending on the particular fact cases. But in some cases, it can actually be very, very large. So for instance, in certain provinces where, for instance, a plan is only held to have in assets 85% of the value of the plan on a wind up basis, you could then have as much as or more than 15% of the total value of the plan. And so for very large employers, if we look at some of those that have been through a CCAA process, in Stelco, for instance, there was 20,000 pensioners. So that can end up being an awful lot of money and an awful lot of people. And so, in some of these cases, we've seen, in the case of Air Canada, for instance, the unfunded pension liability at the entry into their restructurings was very significant. And so if that had been in place, if there'd been a super priority at the time, it would have potentially dwarfed all of the other available creditors and potentially prevented a restructuring.
Okay, so this is great, because this is where I'm trying to get in. So I know there's a number of stakeholders. When I take a step back, I have the federal government, I have the provincial government, that they have to work together as it relates to the regulator. They're the employee and the employer. Really, the two ones, the corporation and the employee, are the one that I want to focus on. As it relates to the employer, what advantages and what disadvantages this clause is going to have on their ability to be able to get credit, line of credit or credits, and what is the impact from a percentage and from a dollar on the employee, and what risk they're getting exposed to? Because the government works with the regulation. I really want to understand from the two key stakeholders, the business as well as the individual, the employee, what are the risks and who is at more risk because of this?
Yeah, and so the degree of risk, and I'll come at this in two ways. So the degree of risk varies, as I said, depending on the regulation that the pension plan itself is subject to. Because obviously, if the pension plan isn't required to be fully funded on a solvency basis, that creates greater risk for workers, because obviously there's not enough that's actually being held in asset to be able to make those payouts in the case of an insolvency. Where those pension regulations are stronger and require greater degrees of funding, that obviously places less risk to the employee, and in that case. Now your question though, in terms of what would a super priority, where would the risks kind of go, and what would be the potential impacts? So if there was a super priority, the theory, I think, is that obviously that there's less risk for workers because they will be paid first, and so that unfunded pension liability would be there. But in some cases, that unfunded pension liability actually still would not be fully serviced by the assets on hand of the organization. So in one of the insolvencies, that covered over 24,000 pensioners that went through in 2004, the unfunded pension liability in that case was $1.8 billion. That would have significantly dwarfed the assets that were on hand at the individuals, and so they still wouldn't have been fully paid even with a super priority. But because there wasn't a super priority, that restructuring ultimately brought all of the other creditors to bear, and that entity was able to restructure and allow for those 24,000 pensioners to emerge into a viable entity that could still continue to make pension contributions and ultimately pay out pensions. Now, if you're a lending institution and there's a super priority in place, that means that super priority gets paid out before you do as a secured creditor. And so there's a couple of potential behaviors that you would take in mind to ensure that you'd mitigated your potential risk. One is obviously that you potentially charge a higher premium to the cost of credit, because now there's a possibility that you will not be actually paid on a secured basis because there's actually someone who ranks above you in insolvency.
I apologize if I may interrupt you. So I'll draw a parallel. I'll draw a parallel that, let's say I have a mortgage and I renew it every 5 years. Or if it's a variable, I renew it, annually or every 2 years. And during each renewal, they still ask for the same documents, the same financials to make sure that still can, service the debt. Is there a procedure that these large corporations can put in place that on a regular basis, whether it's annually, whether it's quarterly, the same way I think all the executives get their, some of their bonuses on a quarterly basis or on an annual basis? Is there a procedures that you suggest corporation could in place to be able to monitor that portion of the pension and be able to highlight risk that would reassure the financial institution that you're talking about, that, hey, look, we're still tracking, we're still, our investment is solid, and we still would be able to fulfill the commitment that we've made?
So that's called an actuarial valuation, and actually an actuarial valuation is required under federal pension regulations on an annual basis where you are less than 100% solvent on a wind-up basis. And so that actually does continue to calculate the unfunded pension liability, and actually then requires special payments. So we actually require the gap between a fully funded pension and on a solvency basis and that which is within the account to be paid through special payments over the course of the subsequent 5 years. And we then require
so what is the concern? Well, I apologize for interrupting. So what is the concern that the financial institution have? Because
the concern is if that unfunded, they may know what that unfunded pension liability is, but if that unfunded pension liability is going to be paid ahead of them in an insolvency, that obviously creates increased risk for their ability to get paid back, which means that they're going to calculate that into the risk premium they charge, or they won't lend at all. One of the other fears we have is if there actually is a unfunded pension liability and there is a super priority for that actually one of the potential kind of strategic behaviors that might actually come from lenders is not to assert its pressure on the company to fully fund their pension, which is what some people kind of theoretically imagine would happen, especially since that often would mean that you'd be taking it out of working capital, but instead that those lenders will call their loans, and they'll call their loans early to actually ensure that they get paid, and therefore put the company into liquidation.
Yeah, thank you. Just last question, because I want to be cognizant of all my other colleagues who have their hands up. So when we look at this clause in summary bullet point, what is this clause one different than the existing law, and how would it change the current law? And that's my last question.
So what clause 1 does is creates a super priority for unfunded pension liabilities in Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act restructurings. And essentially what happens right now is that unfunded pension liabilities are treated as unsecured creditors alongside other unsecured creditors like small and medium-sized enterprises and other suppliers that have aided and provided services that have yet to be paid by the organization. In the current scheme, super priorities are afforded in a couple of categories. So first of all, we provide a super priority for unpaid wages up to a cap of $2,000. We also provide for a super priority for unpaid payroll taxes, so employment insurance and CPP. And that's to ensure that employees actually can get their last bit of pay, that doesn't actually go unpaid. And we actually have a program federally that doesn't even require the employee to participate in the insolvency process. We actually take their spot in the insolvency through the wage earner protection program and provide them for that piece. We then have preferred claims. Preferred claims are relatively rare. There's a small number of them. They exist in a couple of existences. Then there's secured creditors, which are those who actually lent on the basis that they were insured against assets and that those assets would be utilized to be able to provide them with the security of their loan. And then there's unsecured creditors. And so in this particular case, they would take that unfunded pension liability in a restructuring and provide for it at the same level at that very early stage. So as we've indicated, what that can do in certain situations is actually wipe out available assets for other sources of creditors or other scales of creditors, and potentially prevent a restructuring from existing.
Thank you. I'm going to yield the rest of my time to the chair to sign. But I'm hoping one of my colleagues would ask about the question of what does this do to our competitiveness, especially for large corporation, the corporations that we talked about, those 3,000 corporations, especially if there are international corporations, what would it do to their competitiveness, especially among, G7, G20, and OECD? So I'm going to yield my time, the rest to the chair to assign accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So before I go to, we have MP Jacek, then MP Erskine-Smith, MP Genereux, MP Poliev, and MP Assassi. But I just want to confirm to MP Poliev, we've received the amendment, so it has been circulated. Thank you for that. MP Jacek, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Obviously, we heard testimony over the last couple of sessions from individuals representing groups of pensioners in the defined benefit category. And you've certainly, Mr. Shan, through the questions Mr. Johari asked you, given a sense of the size of that group of people, which is rapidly diminishing in terms of businesses employing a defined benefit plan system for their employees. And I know in my own riding, there's so many people working in the gig economy, working on contract, and of course they don't have any type of pension at all. But I want to follow up a little bit on the defined contribution type of pension plan, which is certainly increasingly common. In terms of that, what type of protection is given to pensioners in the face of an insolvency or potential insolvency?
Yeah, one thing that's important to note at the outset is that pension funds are held in trust and are sacrosanct and cannot be used for alternative purposes. And that's true both for defined contribution and defined benefit pension plans. And so when a company is taking a pension contribution off of every paycheck and putting it in, it's going into a dedicated account that actually continues to accrue value through the investment scheme that it's put through. In the case of a defined benefit pension plan, whatever is in the plan is absolutely sacrosanct, as we indicated. It can't be used for other purposes. For the case of a defined contribution plan, that means that it's essentially the risk is being shared between the employer and the employee. And so in an insolvency, what essentially is available to the individual employee is essentially whatever was invested to date. there isn't an unfunded portion, because essentially the way that a defined contribution plan works is that the contribution has been defined, it's been made every single time. As we indicated, any unfunded pension contributions for the previous period of work need to be remitted as a super priority. And so whatever is in that fund is available and then gets distributed. Normally that happens as a purchase of annuity. There are some mechanisms that have been existed in a couple of insolvencies where potentially they've been allowed to be converted into other investment accruing vehicles. But essentially, for a defined contribution plan, you essentially have very strong protections in place, because essentially there wasn't any expectation other than the fact that the market would return what the market returned. In the case of a defined benefit plan, that's not the case, obviously, because what was defined was the benefit, and that requires a certain level of market return to be able to get to that level.
So essentially, in this particular bill, it doesn't really affect pensioners who have a defined contribution plan. Their contribution to the investment vehicle, they must be aware that there is some risk in terms of the vagaries of the market or whatever. So presumably they understand that. So is there anything in this bill that adds any protection for them?
No, this bill is aimed at a couple of elements. So it's aimed at unfunded pension liabilities, it's aimed at terminated group insurance plans, and it's aimed at severance pay. But in terms of a defined contribution, it is essentially defined contribution plans aren't treated under this bill, because essentially a defined contribution already has a super priority for any unfunded, unremitted payments into the plan for that last little period just leading up to the insolvency. And then, as I said, it's subject to the vagaries of the market in terms of investment returns as to what ultimately those individuals will receive upon retirement.
Thank you. So my riding is in Ontario, and you've alluded to the fact that in Ontario there are already certain legislative provisions that do provide considerable protection. In your view, would it be perhaps more reasonable to ensure that every province institute their own regulations more in line with what Ontario has, rather than instituting this particular bill?
So I won't presume to speak for the provincial approach to pension regulation, but what I can say is why we've approached it the way we have at the federal level is that we believe that pension funds are ultimately should be 100% funded on an insolvency basis, because of the fact that we see real risks that insolvencies can't necessarily be fully predicted. And so by requiring plan sponsors to be at 100% funding, we anticipate and allow for the possibility that firm might ultimately go insolvent, and that therefore there is sufficient funds in place to allow for the promise that they've made. For provinces that don't require that level of funding, we didn't introduce that at the federal level, in part because we thought that introduced significant undue risk to workers and pensioners, because they raised the possibility that you could have an insolvency that would lead to an unfunded pension liability of a significant nature. And so we do see real value in solving the problems of unfunded pension liabilities while the firm is actually in a position to be able to address them. That is, while they were operating and ongoing. Doing it in the case of an insolvency is extraordinarily difficult, because by definition, there is insufficient funds to be able to pay out all those to whom there is obligations. And so therefore you are ultimately making strategic decisions then, and policy-minded decisions about who should be paid in what regard. And then we also, wanted to be mindful of the fact that we were very sort of supportive of the desire for incentive to restructure and allow for entities to emerge as a going concern and continue to make the contributions that ultimately will lead to greater security.
Thank you very much. And of course, I do understand the sensitivity around the federal provincial situation. So, Madam Chair, I would say that those are all my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, we have MP Erskine Smith.
Thanks very much, Chair. I have 4 questions. The first is, you mentioned contributions are a deemed trust, and we heard testimony, and I think the Supreme Court has upheld this general view that pensions are deferred wages. And I wonder, just from a principled rationale, before we get into the details of this bill, but from a principled rationale, why shouldn't there, forget super priority, why wouldn't all pensions be a deemed trust when they're deferred wages?
Yeah, it is an important question that you ask, and I'd say essentially what we see it as deferred compensation, not necessarily wages, and we see compensation as a promise made in a way similar to the promises that were made by that same organization in a number of different domains. So the promise upon receipt of a service to pay for that service is also akin to that, which is where you find other unsecured creditors. And so essentially, what we need to do in insolvency process is be able to look at all of those who have essentially IOUs, promises held, and figure out a mechanism by which to provide for an orderly treatment of those. And while we've deemed what's in the fund as absolutely sacrosanct, what is not in the fund is held to be akin to that which is other creditors and their unpaid bills as well.
When we look at the federal policy, you've mentioned it today a few times, that we require 100% funding on an insolvency basis for the sake of pensions. And that's in relation to not only the contributions, which would be in deemed trust, but also in relation to this promise of return as it relates to DB pensions. That's right?
I'm not sure I follow the second half of that.
So on an insolvency basis, we say, you've just said to me, well, we treat them on an unsecured basis alongside other creditors. But you're telling me the federal policy is that there needs to be 100% funding on an insolvency basis of pensions.
Yes, well, that's the regulatory obligation is to be at 100% funding on a wind-up basis. However, when that is not the case, we require special payments to be made over the course of the subsequent 5 years to be able to make up that gap. So while there is 100% requirement, not all pension funds are going to be at 100% on a wind-up basis at all given moments.
But I understand that. But the overall policy, my point is, in answer to my first question, you've effectively said, well, contributions are deemed trust because that is deferred wages. This other is deferred compensation, so they're unsecured. But actually, federal policy is that should all be funded on a windup. That we want to make sure pensions, regardless of whether they are contributions into the pension or just the return that is promised to them in an unsecured manner right now, that all of that we want to see funded on a 100% basis.
We see strong funding levels within pensions as an important parameter to ensure for the continued vitality and of the promise.
Right.
We then treat the missing portion essentially as a creditor and alongside other classes of creditors in the case of an insolvency. So the goal of the policy is strong, well-funded pensions. The reality of an unfunded pension liability in insolvency is that's an unfunded asset, that's an unfunded credit that needs to be paid, and it needs to be paid alongside the creditor.
No, I take your point, but the federal regulatory policy.
Apologies. Sorry, MP Erskine-Smith, I hate to cut you off, but the bells are ringing. And in order for us to continue, I would require unanimous consent to continue. So I'd like to know if I have unanimous consent to continue while the bells are ringing. If you could let me know. Do I have unanimous consent? I see Majid Johari shaking his head. MP Johari, could you?
No, Madam Speaker, I know this is the crazy season, and I just want to make sure I am logged in and I'm ready to vote. I don't know what the vote is, but I'd like to get caught up on it before I go to vote. So I need that time. Thank you.
Okay, so we will suspend for the vote, and if everyone can please make sure that you're logged back on as soon as the vote is called. We'll then continue. We will, MP Erskine-Smith, I'll put a little note that you still had the floor, so I'll put that little note on. And so with that, I'll suspend. welcome back, everyone. So we were at MP Erskine Smith. I'm not sure if he was finished. He had the floor, so I'm going to turn it over to MP Erskine Smith.
Thanks very much.
Were you finished?
No, not quite. Not quite.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to, I suppose, to pick up from where I left off. The federal policy, the idea is, through regulation, we ensure that pensioners, the idea is that there will be funds in insolvency to fulfill pensions 100%. And I guess the idea would be provinces have different thresholds, the lower thresholds in some cases, no threshold in the case of Quebec. But to get at what we want, which is protecting pensioners, that would be the policy that would do the most. Is that fair to say?
I mean, yes, I think our view is that the greatest, but the moment at which time it is most easy to influence the security of pensions is when the firm is up and running and operational. And that's why we require firms, while operational, to be dedicating capital towards the requirements of their pension obligations.
Understood. And given though this is a concern, this is obviously federal policies, I say, to protect pensioners, at least as it relates to federally incorporated companies. I mean, when we look at provincial governments that aren't doing the same thing, and we say, well, we still care about pensioners, it's consistent with our policy rationale because we want to see 100% funding for pensioners. Is it simply a concern then? It's not to say super priority isn't something we are opposed to in principle. We want to protect those pensioners. Your argument is instead, well, we're concerned in practice that it would lead to fewer restructurings, and that would actually make pensioners worse off. Is that the fundamental rationale that you would put back to say why we don't support this bill?
So yes, we think that there are unintended economic consequences that come to bear as a function of a super priority. One is a heightened cost of credit. The second is an incapacity for companies to continue to operate. And then the third is that if it were to come to pass in a choice between a liquidation or a restructuring, that it potentially would tilt the balance towards that of a liquidation, because there would be a pursuit by creditors of as much security of their owed capital as possible.
Then two questions follow that from mine, and then I'm done, because the heightened cost is less concerning to me, because pensioners should be fully paid, and if it means that businesses have higher costs in the marketplace, so be it, to fulfill their obligations to their employees. But I do share the concern about unintended consequences. So I wonder, with the two remaining questions I have, first, isn't it the case? So I'm counsel for a union, say in the company is in receivership, and I don't want the company to go bankrupt if it's going to make my folks worse off. But the super priority gives me a position of leverage and negotiation. I can always negotiate away from that position, but why would we be opposed to a stronger position that they can negotiate from? That surely we would be confident in counsel in a restructuring process who are looking after the best interests of pensioners to say, well, if it truly is the case, the facts on the ground in that particular matter, that forcing our hand and maintaining our super priority over all of our claims is going to send this company into insolvency and they will be unable to restructure. We can make that decision as pensioners collectively through counsel in our best interest. That if it is in our best interest to claim now, we'll claim now. If it's in our best interest to claim to take a discount to ensure the company continues to be a going concern, so be it. But why wouldn't we want them to have that negotiating position?
I'm not sure if MP Erskine Smith, was your question directed at someone specifically?
To Mark.
Okay. I'm not sure if he's having a technical problem because he looks like he's frozen. One moment. I'm going to just check with the clerk if there's a possibility of IT can check with him if I'm assuming it's on his end. Yeah, I think he just disappeared.
Nate, you're not supposed to treat
I'm back.
witnesses this way.
There you go. He's back. Okay, go ahead.
I don't know if you caught all that, Mark. Did you catch it? Did you catch enough of that?
Just the last little bit of it is I think the premise of your question.
Why wouldn't we want them to have the position that they can negotiate from? I mean, we are presuming that they're incapable of protecting themselves by saying you're not entitled to super priority because of unintended consequences. They can always negotiate away from that. They can always negotiate away from that position in their own best interest.
So I guess I'd offer a few thoughts on that. So one of the goals of having as few rules in place at the time of restructuring. So I'll put it this way: a CCAA restructuring has a number of guardrails and safeguards put in place to ensure the preservation of a fair process that has integrity for all participants. But one of the premises of it, though, is that we walk in relatively with a blank slate to try and encourage an outcome that ultimately will allow for the company to emerge. That we don't predetermine in the restructuring process who's got kind of advantage, because at the end of the day, the restructuring is ultimately what's better off for everybody, and we don't actually put in place a significant amount of impediments to that. We actually look for parties to come together for creative solutions. And so the protection that's afforded to pensioners and also to other members, other unsecured creditors, is essentially the mechanism by which you actually have to achieve to be able to get out of the restructuring. So, and that is 50% of the total number of creditors in every class need to approve to the ultimate settlement agreement, and 2/3 of the value of each creditor class needs to approve to the restructuring agreement as well. And so that is the fundamental preservation of the integrity. So we actually do give everybody leverage, including for an unfunded pension liability, a very significant leverage, because if that's a very large unfunded liability, that's a very significant portion of their class, which means that they actually do carry weight in articulating the restructured outcome. One of the challenges is if you actually put that in place at the front and say, hey guys, I hold all of the cards. I'd rather come to a restructuring perspective, but I could also just walk away right now and get paid. That assumption that somehow will lead to other better outcomes, I think presumes that they actually will seek that restructured entity. And we have to remember that there's very different interests even within that class. You've got active workers who actually have an unfunded pension liability for continued capacity for their retirement security in future. And you have existing retirees with varying degrees of life expectancy, sorry to be crude, but who obviously, in terms of what their kind of negotiating position is, or their desire for payment now versus payment, of a restructured entity, are highly varied. And so I would simply suggest that the theory here that just suggests that they always have the capacity to be 100% paid. But that they'll use that appropriately, and that if it ends up that they just want a liquidation, that's okay. But if they actually want a full restructuring, we also need to think about what those unintended consequences. So your point earlier about the fact that you weren't necessarily concerned about access to credit, one of the things that we have to recognize is that access to credit is what allows for the working capital that allows for this organization to continue to be operational and making pension obligation contributions. And so that access to capital and the cost of that capital factors into the capacity of the entity to be able to continue to run, make profit, and then ultimately make determinations of payments into their pension plan.
Thanks for that. Two things quick, and then my last question. I mean, one, there are secured creditors over and above the unfunded pension liabilities who in many cases would have less interest in the company proceeding as a going concern, right? Like they're just interested in getting their money back in many cases. The interest of the pensioners would be in many cases not only getting their money back, but they certainly don't want to see the company go down if it means that it's going to negatively impact their pension going forward. So I think as you look at classes of creditors, you'll find that pensioners, more than most creditors, are actually interested in the company continuing as a going concern. The second thing I would say, just as it relates to unsecured creditors, I think this gets to the fundamental point. Do we think that employees, those who have worked a lifetime for a business, are sui generis. I think they are actually. They shouldn't be treated the same as other unsecured creditors who have obligations to any number of other third-party businesses. My last question is in relation to a cap. We heard some testimony from the Canadian Federation of Pensioners as it relates to better striking the balance, and they pointed to other jurisdictions that do better strike a balance in relation to having a super priority or some preferred status, but subject to a cap. And in Canada, we seem to only have had this conversation as between super priority for everything, or in your view today, no super priority because of unintended consequences. Wouldn't we, if we are to address your concerns, do we not address them in supporting this bill potentially? Do we not address them by virtue of a cap? What are your thoughts on that?
So I guess there's a number of considerations that are both fact specific and recommendation specific. So is it a capped super priority? Is it a capped preferred claim? I think some of the considerations around international is worth noting that no one has a super priority, that no other country in the world has a super priority. And so to the questions earlier about competitiveness, we actually have a super priority for unfunded pension contributions that were due off of employment from the most recent wages. We don't have a super priority for unfunded pension liabilities. But it is worth noting that the recognition of international examples is that no one actually has such a system. There are some that have looked at some of these preferred claims. On the questions of caps, I mean, again, would depend on whether you're talking about a capped super priority or a capped preferred claim, and whether or not that would be a capped claim in restructuring or a capped claim in insolvency. Because those have very different functions as indicated. Because if there's a capped preferred claim in restructuring, it would still rank below secured creditors in an insolvency, which would prompt secured creditors potentially to seek a liquidation to ensure that they actually had greater access to their assets. It's also worth noting that in some cases that even a capped claim potentially has two consequences. One is whether or not it would actually potentially still have the capacity to scudder the chances of a restructuring. So in a given example, so if we look at a recent restructuring of a steel company, a capped preferred claim for an unfunded pension liability when there's 20,000 pensioners, even at $20,000 per pensioner, would still result in significant losses for pensioners, because in that example, 20,000 pensioners would have a claim of $400 million. The capped preferred claim would likely have to be paid as part of a CCAA restructuring plan to be effective, because otherwise, essentially, we're going to prompt the insolvency, as we indicated. Secured creditors would have no reasons to support a CCAA plan that would pay unfunded liabilities in full and reduce their potential recovery. So with in this particular case, the liquidation value of the entire entity was $400 million. Secured creditors would prefer a BIA liquidation and would pay secured claims first. And so the capped preferred claim could result in some recovery for pensioners after secured claims, but the loss would be very significant. And in this particular instance, what we ended up seeing was actually a restructured entity with a continued going concern company that was making pension obligations. And so I think we need to be, I'd have to see very specifically what the proposal on caps were and how exactly it was noted, but just to note that caps themselves don't necessarily take away from some of the theoretical considerations, as well as real life considerations around whether or not they still will lead to liquidations and not restructurings, increased cost of capital, see more entities potentially fail to survive, and therefore actually place pensioners and workers at risk.
Thanks, Mark. Those are all my questions.
Okay, so our speaking order is MP Généreux, MP Poliev, MP Essasi, MP Duval. So those the list I have. So MP Généreux, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Chair. To our two witnesses, what I've understood, Mark, is that the bill we have before us is not perfect compared to other bills that have been tabled for the same reasons and purposes for the last 20 years. Now, in your opinion, is this bill better? Is it better to accept this bill and its consequences? That's the first question. And a second question, the secured amounts that you've just referred to in some countries, I think in the United States it's $50,000. Now, in the bill, well, that's not the case in this bill, but these secured amounts, are they secured by the corporation or through the funds dedicated for retirement, or is it guaranteed by government? Because, and are there any governments in this world that provide those guarantees for funds?
So one of you two, it's okay.
Oui, merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. In regard to your first question, it is difficult to compare this bill with other bills because there are some innovative aspects in this bill compared to older bills. And I will switch to English if you will.
A few interesting pieces to it. So one is it has a super priority for pensions, but it also has a preferred claim for terminated group insurance plans. It also has a preferred claim for severance pay in BIA liquidations, which is also relatively novel. It has some aspects that go beyond what some other bills have aimed to do in the sense that it has a very wide definition of potentially employee pay, which would include, for instance, executive bonuses and a number of other zones that potentially are different than previous attempts in this space. I guess, as I say, I'm not one to kind of compare, and I can't speak, from a government perspective or a public service perspective as to kind of what I can just say is the considerations. And I guess the consideration that we have here is that our goal is to return as much value back to workers and the economy as is possible. And we think that the strongest way to do that is to ensure for as many businesses as possible, where possible, to continue operations and continue to offer their pension plans. And so we do see real risks in this bill with the capacity to be able to do that. And so, if it wasn't for the fact that we've actually seen strong restructurings that have actually allowed for pensions to be able to continue, and I can look to a number of recent examples. We have a now well-funded Air Canada pension plan as a function of restructurings that have allowed for that pension to continue to be open and providing for its workers, which if we look at some of the potentials of that, given the unfunded pension liability at the time of its restructuring, may have actually resulted in a liquidation. And we've seen that in a couple of other zones like Stelco. And so this is the challenge. Concerning your second question, est-ce que c'est possible de répéter seulement
Would it be possible to repeat it? Are the amounts guaranteed by government?
You're speaking of in the United States and in the United Kingdom cases is what's sometimes referred to as a pension benefit guarantee fund, which is essentially a fund that's funded by plan sponsors collectively, all plan sponsors, to be available in the case where a plan sponsor is incapable of being able to pay out their full amount.
Like a pool.
Like a pool. And so a portion of contributions are actually required based on the size of the plan to be remitted to the pension benefit guarantee fund. They exist in the United States. It exists in the United States. It exists at the federal level. It exists in the United Kingdom, and it exists in Ontario.
Does it guarantee full 100% of the amount? I guess
no. So they vary. Each of those three schemes vary very differently between them. Ontario has a scheme upon which it essentially guarantees a portion of the first payments.
Could be a balance. Could be a balance besides what was already in the plan, or.
So essentially, if there's an unfunded pension liability, so for instance, in Ontario it goes up to $18,000, but it's on a percentage basis. So it essentially makes up the difference. So on the first $1,000, for instance, it guarantees all of the difference all the way up to that, and then it has a trailing amount that goes on to a cap of $18,000. Okay. it's worth noting a couple of things about pension benefit guarantee funds, just in general terms. One is um, um, because defined benefit pension plans are relatively uncommon these days. They're less and less common. You have a decreasing pool of people to be able to create the pool to insure them, essentially. So if you're actually using additional contributions from plan sponsors to be able to make up that pool is increasingly small, which is why when you have a very large insolvency, you have the potential to actually use up the entirety of the pool. That actually happened in the Nortel situation for both the US Pension Benefit Guarantee Fund and the UK Pension Benefit Guarantee Fund, where essentially the fund was essentially broke. It itself had insufficient funds to be able to pay out its requirements and needed recapitalization. The problem, of course, of recapitalization is that it then requires you to go back to those same plan sponsors who are having difficulty making their pension obligations to provide additional funds to be able to make up for that pool. To note that one of the considerations of a pension benefit guarantee fund in a federal context is that the vast majority of defined benefit pension plans are regulated by provincial pension regulators. And so if there was a federal fund that essentially said, we'll make up for part of this gap, that we potentially might have a federal government with obligations to make up for gaps where we don't actually control the actual requirements of client solvency, for instance. So in provinces where you have very low solvency requirements, where funds are essentially allowed to grow very large unfunded pension liabilities, we potentially would have this backstop mechanism, but no front stop mechanism to actually ensure pension health. So it is one of the challenges. It should be very clear that pension benefit guarantee funds are not super priorities. They are additional means by which to make up for pension gaps and unfunded pension liabilities where a plan sponsor has insufficient funds. But they're in some ways separate from the insolvency system and separate in the consideration of the rank or the priority order in which creditors are dealt with in an insolvency.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, next we have MP Polyev. I'm just checking there he is. Okay, you have the floor, go ahead. And then right after you, we have MP Assassi and MP Duval.
Thank you very much. Do I pronounce your name correctly? Is it Mr. Sean?
It is, yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for your appearance. You're obviously extremely knowledgeable about your file. So thank you for what you do. So I'm going to just go through a bunch of the contentions in this bill on both sides. So the first I'm going to ask, because you deal, I'm sure, with corporate and industrial stakeholders that you must interact with industry to do your job properly. Is that a fair comment to make?
That is, yes.
Where the hell are they? Like, we haven't heard anything from, I was expecting the business community was going to be storming into this committee warning about the dangers of this bill, and we've heard nothing, frankly.
Yeah, I obviously can't speak to that. I mean, we've had representations in the past when we pursued legislative amendments to the BIA and CCAA process, I guess 2 years ago, as part of the Retirement Security Project. We ran consultations across the country and certainly had strong feedback from plan sponsors and from the Association of Plan Sponsors, alongside very strong representations from workers, from unions, from think tanks and academics. So certainly in previous consultations, there has been active kind of consideration from kind of a number of parties as to what warrants good retirement security and pension and insolvency policy. But so I can't speak to why they didn't storm in today and or earlier and make their representations.
Well, it just, I think it was the great Rabbi Hillel said, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And there's these people who we're told are so worried about this bill, but they're not speaking up. I think we had 1 or 2 witnesses with concerns. The rest were in favor of it. My office made a point, in the interest of balance, to send an invitation or ask that the clerk invite the Chamber of Commerce and the Business Council. I understand they didn't even bother to accept our invitation. And presumably they represent the employer. There's another organization, I think it was called FedCo, which is responsible for federally regulated employers. Did I miss it? Did we hear a peep from them? I don't think we did. So if all the plan sponsors are so worried about this bill, I don't know why they didn't come and say so. Because right now, as if we're just relying on the evidence presented in the committee, the testimony was overwhelmingly in the other direction. So, and I appreciate you've come here with a lot of very intelligent insights into both the statute, the bill, and if I could add a third, the technical consequences of passing it. Frankly, you're the only one doing that, and I suppose that's a compliment. But the industry has been asleep at the switch. So on that point, the argument that some people have made in the past against this bill and this idea is that it would raise the cost of capital. Businesses would have a harder time raising loans if lenders knew that they would be knocked down the bankruptcy liquidation food chain. Mm-hmm. Now, I have to say that I find that to be a strength of the bill, because it would force CEOs in the present day to ensure their pension is properly funded in order to be able to go to the markets. If lenders were consistently telling the CFO and the CEO, well, we're not going to lend to you because we're worried that we're going to be behind a pension liability, that'd be a wonderful incentive to get the executives to eliminate that liability by ensuring they've put enough funds into the pension entity. What do you say to that?
I think a lot depends on the relative market prospects, the operational considerations of the entity in question, and then the time duration. One of our considerations is, sure, in kind of pure market theory, I think one would imagine that if the only chance for me to get 100% paid was if the pension was 100% funded, I will press for the pension to be 100% funded so that I get 100% paid. The alternative, though, is if I believe that there's a mechanism by which I could potentially get 100% paid through some other means, I might pursue it. Notably, if I know that you have a large unfunded pension liability, I may make a couple of other choices. One is I may charge you a lot for that capital, which may force you into a liquidation because you actually may not be able to access it at that price. The second is I might try and be the first, and this is what one of the principles of our insolvency system is. We have what we coin a prevention against the race to the courthouse, and that's why we make all of the creditors come together, line up, figure out exactly where they fit and how they go, and then we treat them class by class in that consideration. One of the fears is that actually you might incentivize not a race to the courthouse, but a race to call your loan. In that, if you actually had an existing liability with the entity, if you thought that you could go first before your competitors do, if you know that they had other secured lenders, but that you could potentially get your piece of the pie back before they actually went insolvent, you would do that and you'd potentially try and get paid, but that would just force the entity into liquidation sooner and then potentially prevent that restructuring that we were hoping for. So while in theory, I think there is some notion that this could put pressure, the other is potentially we need to look at time frame and amount. So as we noted, the pension regulations vary enormously jurisdiction by jurisdiction. And so in some cases that pension liability is going to be made up, but what's the time frame in which you're going to put pressure on me to make it back? Because I can only really make it back to the degree to which I either have sufficient excess working capital that I can defer to my pension obligations rather than my working capital, or I've got market returns that potentially need to somehow generate that mix. One potential unintended consequences of that pressure is I actually pursue a much riskier investment scheme with those pension funds to be able to make back that portion, because your pressure on me to say, Mark, you need to be 100% funded in 2 years or I'm calling my loan, is suddenly I'm like, oh man, I need to make up that gap. And so I race out and put myself in very risky investments that potentially may or may not pay off, but ultimately will lead to the outcome you are seeking as my creditor. And so I think we'd have to consider a number of these factors when we look at whether or not it will actually apply pressure from lenders towards the good outcome of a fully funded pension, or whether or not we actually will see unintended consequences like early liquidations, races to calling loans, and potentially riskier mechanisms or stewardship of pension funds by plan sponsors to be able to meet the requirements of their lenders.
Right, but I guess what I have a hard time believing that it would be in the interest of management to throw away pension funds on extremely risky lottery type investments. That would more likely reduce the overall value of the pension fund and make it harder still to raise money under this bill. So I think what it would actually do is force management to get the pensions in order now, because if your lenders, if you're a CEO and your lenders are all telling you, listen, the big obstacle to lending to you is that you don't properly fund your pension plan. Well, the first thing you're going to do is try to find a way to fund your pension plan because it's in your interest, or else you can't borrow. And then your shareholders are going to say, "Why, Mr. CEO, why can't you borrow any money? Why won't anybody lend to you?" And then you'll have to say to them, "Well, it's because I didn't fund my pension plan," and that comes first in a liquidation. And so that's the incentive that I think that this bill creates. And
I mean, I guess that depends on whether or not we think
incentive.
that lenders are going to be that singular. Because I mean, one of the things is that if I'm a lender, I'm actually going to look at your full P&L. And I'm going to say, yes, you've got an unfunded pension liability. That makes me scared because I might not get paid. But if you're going to divert working capital, that's actually the means by which you earn profit to go and fund your pension liability, I'm also not going to love you and be super interested in funding you, because now actually the means by which you earn, which is ultimately the mechanism that I'm going to get paid after you paid that pension liability, is also now in jeopardy. And so you'd want a balanced approach from the entity. And so
right, but what you're really saying though, Mr. Sean, is that absent this bill, then that the business would invest in working capital instead of investing in the solvency of the pension fund.
It depends, I guess, on two things. One is the degree to which there is actually excess capital, and so that very much is fact specific depending on the company. And the second is their pension regulations. We don't give them that luxury in federally regulated pension plans. They have to be 100% funded, and then they make special payments over the subsequent 5 years to make up that gap. That's not the case in all regulated pensions. And so if I know that I only have to be at 85% funded on a solvency basis, that 15%, that I can play with. I can make decisions about that. We don't give that luxury. We don't think that that's something that's dispensable in a federally regulated context, but that's not necessarily the case. But if you actually see some of the companies,
the 85% rule, is that exists in certain provinces? Is that what you're saying?
That's right.
I mean, I don't want them to have 15% of the pension fund as play money. That's what I'm trying to avoid.
And what I'm saying is, I think that the strongest way to do that, well, in my consideration, I think one of the things we need to look at is the degree to which pension obligations are actually requiring of that, rather than trying to fix it in insolvency. I mean, to go back to our kind of one of my initial comments, fixing a policy problem at the tail end is very much, it's much harder than trying to fix it at the front end when you actually.
I know, and then I guess what I'm saying, and I guess we'll have to disagree on this, is I think that this bill would actually force them to fix it on the front end, because it would require they get the money in place as soon as they go to bond markets. If you're doing a bond issuance and you're a CEO, all these extremely sophisticated analysts are going to tear apart your balance sheet, and they're going to say, on the liability side, there's this pension thing, and they're only 84% funded in the pension thing, or 85%. And they're getting away with it because they're in this province that allows it. But I, as a bondholder, would have to come behind that liability. So I'm going to make it known that I'm not bidding on these bonds because their pension is not properly funded. And the CEO then is going to be in a present day position where he has to get the pension in order if he wants to raise money and grow the company. And I think that's actually a positive market discipline to impose on CEOs that are promising pensions to workers and deferring their wages into those pension funds. It's not a bad thing that the CEO is put in that position. It's a good thing. So that's the first point I guess I would make. The next point I would make is why you continue to raise the concern that if companies had to properly fund their pension funds before paying out other creditors in the case of a bankruptcy, that they would be inclined to go bankrupt or fall into insolvency. What if we gave them 3 years for the coming into force of this bill, so that they could use that time to get their act together and replenish their pension funds, eliminate liabilities, and present a positive balance sheet to markets when they raise money?
So right now, so I'll offer a couple of kind of just considerations to that without weighing in one way or the other. Just to say, on our federal regulated pension obligations right now make special payments over 5 years. That's what we see as a reasonable planning window to allow people to make back up their current deficit, because oftentimes that deficit's not a function necessarily of their own making. It's potentially market returns. It's a number of kind of factors. So 3 years. And I believe there was a proposal at some point to potentially make special payments in a certain province only 3 years, and there was pushback to the degree to which 3 years was potentially seen as insufficient. The second is there's nothing in a restructuring context right now that actually prevents from that potentially happening with the consent of the pension regulator and the workers union. And in fact, that's exactly what happened in the case of Air Canada, which was an agreement in the restructuring to forego pension payments for a period of time to allow for the company to get back on its footing post the financial crisis and the complete decimation of air travel. And that ultimately led towards a restructured entity that came back.
My apologies, Mr. Sean. I don't want to interrupt you or you MP Polyev. I'm receiving a note from the clerk that there is a hard stop at 1 o'clock because of a lack of translation services. So we're going to have.
Okay, there's no way we could.
We can't continue. Unfortunately, we can't continue from what I'm understanding from the clerk. So we're going to have to stop there. But what I can do is, MP Polyev, you still had some questions, I think, outstanding. So I can keep the list. I have you, I have MP Isasi and MP Duval on the list to speak. And what we can do is when we pick this back up, what we can do is we can start with you, MP Polyev. Because I don't want to cut you off, but we're being told by the table we have to adjourn.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So with that, what we'll do is I'll work with the clerk to see when we can work with the schedule on this so that we can continue. I want to thank the translators, the witnesses for being here today. Actually, incredibly pertinent and helpful testimony that's going to assist us with this bill. So I'd like to thank you all again. And I want to do a little special shout out to the staff. All of our staff members who have been working incredibly hard, the WHIP staff, the House Leader staff. You guys are helping us do what we are doing, and I know we ask a lot of you. So I just want to give a little special shout out because the unsung heroes of the Hill that we don't often recognize. So thank you so much for what you're doing. And with that, I will call this meeting adjourned. Merci.